wanted to kind of do my last video on my last step on my jig building process. A couple weeks ago I kind of showed you the first step of how I mold and build the jig heads with lead in a mold process, and then I showed you how I paint these with a powder paint. These are actually root beer with gold flake. This is a 5/16 round head jig with a 3/0 hook, 60-degree bend, and that 60-degree bend allows it so that when it's in the water and when it's laying down like this, that hook, the end of the hook eye is facing up a little bit. It's not facing, parallel to the ground, so it keeps it off the rocks and such. So this is going to be a silicone, a full silicone skirt jig. I do make some jigs using living rubber, and here's one here. This is my Crystal Assassin, I call it. I'm not sure if you can see that, but this is, you can see it's got a much larger profile than a silicone skirt here. This is a similar skirt, silicone. But what the rubber actually does is once this is in the water, this rubber skirt really starts to flare out in the water, and it's really a big bass lure. These rubber skirted jigs. But today I am making my Ragin' Cajun jigs, I call them. I name all my jigs so I can remember what kind of helps me remember what they're made out of, what kind of colors I've used. So this is going to have several layers. It's going to have 3 or 4 layers of silicone. The first layer, let me go ahead and zoom in. Well, let me do this first. The first layer I'm going to use is a brown and orange. It's got some gold flake. I use just a half tab of that. And then I use just 2 small strands of this orange and pepper. It's just 2 strands on each set, and I use 2 of them, 1 on each side of the back of the head of the jig, and I'll show you how I put those on. And then the next layer is this purple and blue crystal half tab of silicone. These are all Netcraft silicone strips. And then I finish it off with 2 full tabs. The first one is this peanut butter and jelly, or PBJ Academy. I got this from Academy's lures, and this is the PB&J full tab. And then the last tab is a full tab of green with black flake. Not green pumpkin, but just green with black flake. All right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so I can show you how this is done. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put my molded jig in the vise. Okay, and I use thread. I use a 200 weight thread here. This is black. I know you could use the rubber skirt collars. Those work okay. In fact, when I first started making my own jigs, that's what I used. But I started using this. This gives it a much tighter finish. So the first thing you want to do is put on a base layer of thread around the collar. And the reason why you do that is so the silicone skirts don't slip when you put your first one on. I take that tag end and I just pull it towards the top of the head and just cover that tag end. Cut it off. That way it's secure on there. It's not going to slip. There. I got my base layer on there, and we're ready to put our first strands on. The first strand is going to be this brown and orange. It's got a lot of gold in it. You know, they call it brown and orange, but it's got a lot of gold flake and it looks really nice when it's on the back. And I put this on first so that when you flip over, the first tabs that you put on are the ones that are going to show on the first on your are going to be the prominent colors on your jig, because remember these things upside down and they flip over, so the ones that you put on are the ones that are going to be prominent on your jig. So we'll go ahead and put that one on first. One turn of the thread there. Okay, now this one I like to kind of keep, let me get my eyeglasses on so I can see. Can't see without them. So this first one, and the prominent one, I like to kind of keep, especially if it's a half tab like this one is. This is only a half tab. I like to keep that just on the back of the head. Now a couple turns to secure that on there, like so. Okay, and then my next layer is going to be these orange and pepper strands. These are just, this came off of a full tab, and it's just 2 strands, and I use 2 sets of these. Okay, and I like to put them on the back of the head of the jig, right behind the back of the head, right about just off center. I put one on each side. I put one there, and go ahead and put my next one right next to it, off center, on the back of the head, so that they're like that, you know, so they're, and you'll see when this is done how it's going to look. And then I just put a couple of wraps there. The reason why I put a couple of wraps in between is because I got so many layers going on that as you put on your next layer, and you start manipulating the skirt to, you know, to make sure it's evenly distributed around the collar of the jig, you don't want to move those layers underneath it. So that's important. All right, and I have a mark here where I put this my silicone. I like to have about an inch, you know, about an inch past the bend of the hook, you know, my skirts, and then I can trim them how I feel out there on the water. All right, my next layer is going to be the purple and blue crystal, and that purple and blue with that orange really makes for a nice looking springtime craw pattern, particularly in clear water lakes with a lot of rock. I don't like Table Rock, Bull Shoals. Okay, we'll make sure this is spread evenly around. Maybe put another wrap there so that it's secure on there enough so it doesn't slip. But I want to be able to you know, move the skirt around the collar so I can get it evenly distributed, because this is only a half tab. Okay, all right, that one is on there. A couple turns so it doesn't move, and then my next tab is going to be a full tab of my peanut butter and jelly, or PBJ, from Academy Lures, or Academy, whatever that place is called. I think it's called Academy Lures. Go ahead and put one strand of thread around there just to keep it on there. And since this is a full tab and I got a lot of silicone underneath, I want to be careful that it doesn't slide. Alright, I'll put one more wrap. That'll hold it on there, and I'll be sure that I can manipulate the skirt so that it goes all the way around, otherwise it won't look right. Let's go ahead and take this tab and just kind of wiggle it, move it down the collar so that it's evenly distributed around that collar of the jig. There. Right up into that weed guard hole. That looks good. Alright, the last one is my green with black flake. It's kind of a muted color. Same thing, a full tab. Put that on there with one turn of the thread. Make sure it's evenly distributed around that collar. There. It's a lot of layers of silicone, and this doesn't have the living rubber, but I still consider this a big bass. Definitely not a finesse jig. A big bass lure because of the profile of it. All right, I put another wrap to kind of secure it, then I can turn it around and make sure everything is. As you introduce more wraps, it makes it harder to move and manipulate the silicone strands. There, that's on there. Pretty good. All right, and I got this rubber band back here. I have this rubber band in the back of my vise so I can secure. I don't use it all the time, but I'm going to use it here. I definitely use it when I'm doing my rubber strands because they're so bulky. There, now I'm just going to do about 25 wraps here. As I get started, I want to make sure I'm not binding any of the strands. And as you start turning, you want to start after about 7 or 8 turns, you want to introduce more tension. You don't want to introduce too much tension on the start of your turns because you don't want to cut into your silicone. Now see here, I got one that kind of. Here's a good example of where the thread actually bound up against. It'll bunch up on your silicone strands, and you just need to back out until you. And this happens a lot when you have a lot of silicone strands, where it'll actually pinch one of the strands of silicone. And it'll like bunch up. It'll bunch up on the thread. There. Okay. Finish wrapping these up. Okay. Now, a lot of people use a special tool called a whip finishing tool. I don't have it here, but it's a tool that helps you tie your thread on your jigs. I have a hard time. When you have all this silicone here, that tool gets bunched up in there. Heck with that. I got frustrated and quit using it. So what I do is I just create a loop around the collar like this, come around the back side, and I will just put the spool in the loop 3 times like this and cinch it to the collar, nice and snug. Then I'll do it one more time with just 1 loop, cinch it down, and then for good measure, make sure that's on there right. For good measure, finish it off with another 3 loop tie. There. Cinch it down, snip it, and your thread is done. Now, you could be done here, but what I like to do is beginning where that knot is on the thread on the collar, I will add some head cement. Now, this is a head cement and applicator, and I just put just a drop around each side of the collar, and it dries pretty quick. There. Put that back on there. We're almost done. Okay. All right. Next thing to do is to trim the script material, and I like to start with the smaller strands, like these 2-strand orange and pepper ones, because otherwise with all that silicone it's hard to find those individual smaller strands. And this silicone, I mean, it's notorious for sticking together. You got to sometimes separate them with your hands, but if you pull on the silicone and as you're pulling, cut, it helps to separate those strands that are sticking together. And again, I start with the smaller strands first and finish off with the 2 full tabs of silicone. Only because sometimes it's just hard to find those smaller strands in that jungle of silicone. Because this is a jig with certainly a lot of silicone. And you know, when you introduce living rubber, it's even worse, because the living rubber is just it's like a big curtain all over the thing. It's massive. All right, do the back now. Flip this over. Sometimes it's easier. Again, I will start with these smaller strands. Cut the ends of those tabs. That other orange one, 2-tab orange. Get my blue half tab. Get my brown and orange half tab, and then my 2 full tabs of green and PB&J. That's it. We're almost there. Get these so they're separating. There. We're about ready to put that weed guard into the weed guard hole. Okay, I'm looking just for strands that are still stuck together where they need to be separated. That looks good. All right, before I put the glue on, I'm going to make sure I get a dry fit on that hole. Sometimes there's paint in there, burrs or whatever, so I want to make sure it'll go in first. Yep, and that looks good. Otherwise, you'll have to trim around. If there's any paint or any lead that got introduced in the hole, you may have to clean that out. Okay, I like to use a gel glue, Gorilla Glue or Loctite, Super Glue, but you want to use a gel. If you don't use a gel, what happens is that the glue will start wicking up on your weed guard, and it'll look horrible. It'll start to wick up onto the weed guard. If you use a gel, not so much, if at all. And you don't want to use too much, because I don't care what the package says. They say it'll dry clear, but they don't. They have a white residue and it looks horrible. So you just want to put just a little bit in there. Just a dab. Okay. And then go ahead and put your weed guard in there. And I like to hold it for about 10 seconds. A little bit of pressure. It doesn't take long for this to set. There we go. Take it off the vise. And my Cajun craw is done and ready. There we go. You can see how on the back, how you have that orange, and that first strand we put in, that orange and brown, is prominent on the back, followed by that blue and crystal. Not a whole lot, just enough there. So that's what's prominent, are those colors on the back, as we put those on first. That's it, guys. This one is ready to set, dry for a little bit, and you can see here I got about 15 of them in the box here. and I have a few more. So I just thought I'd wrap up and finish this video series up, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.